if you look at an object that you have sitting on your mantle and you've been looking at it for years, well, sometimes if you just turn it, the whole thing takes on a new aspect. And so that was my revelation about New York and about American beginnings. The new book is called Taking Manhattan. It comes out in March 2025, and it focuses, it incorporates the end game, the end of New Netherland and of New Amsterdam and the English takeover as a really fascinating story on its own. Taking Manhattan, there's really two takings in the story. The one is the English taking it from the Dutch, which the book argues wasn't so much as a taking as kind of a merger. And the earlier one, of course, is the Dutch taking it from the native peoples. So you've got the end game, it's the late summer of 1664. You have the Dutch clustered in this vibrant little city of New Amsterdam at the southern tip of Manhattan Island. And here comes this flotilla, this English fleet of warships to take over. England and the Dutch Republic had been rivals throughout the 17th century. And throughout that time, the Dutch were ahead. They were the first ones to develop, this global trade network and so on. The English had planted the colonies in New England, and they now sort of belatedly realized that they needed this central spot, because New Netherland wasn't just New Amsterdam, it wasn't just the New York City area, it extended over all or part of 5 future states: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Delaware. So it was this big chunk that the English are suddenly realizing, oh, we need that. What's really interesting in this story to me is that it's not just the English versus the Dutch. In England in the 17th century, you have vicious hatred, rivalry, civil war between two groups in society. The one, by our terms today, by my terms, I would call them religious extremists, the Puritans, and there were many other varieties of that. The other, in the Civil War, they're called the Royalists because they were supporters of the king, but that's a little bit of a misnomer. I think they were essentially everyone who was against the religious extremists, people who wanted things to be the way they were. So this other party are the moderates, you would say, the anti-extremists. And they were also, many of them, the founders at this very same time of the Royal Society, which is the first society devoted to science. It is that contingent of English society that comes sailing into the harbor to take this from the Dutch. Here are these English ships, and Richard Nicolls, the leader of this contingent, with their cannons pointed. Here are the Dutch in Manhattan with their cannons pointed. They're ready to go at it, but they pause. And for about 2 weeks, they're sending boats back and forth with messengers. Nicolls had also done a lot of research before he left London. In fact, with him on his ship were a couple of people who had been very close to Stuyvesant. So he knew a lot, and he was learning a lot about this colony, what it was, this, presumably about this notion of tolerance. What he was fascinated by was what the Dutch were doing here and why it succeeded so well, why Manhattan was a more successful place than what the English were doing in Virginia or in Boston. So as they're sending these messengers back and forth, they're learning about each other. The Dutch have long realized that the West India Company, which runs the place supposedly, have not had their best interests at heart. They've not supplied them with supplies, with soldiers, what they need to really flourish. And from the English side, Nicolls knows that the Puritans in New England are essentially his enemies. But these people these Dutch people in Manhattan, he can pretty much see eye to eye with. So what they do, these two groups, and this was my little insight in creating the book, was they essentially invented New York. In that 2-week period, this English group, not the two governments at home, but this group of English people on these ships that were anchored in Gravesend Bay, and this group of Dutch at the tip of Manhattan Island, hashed out this idea. What if instead of me, Nicolls, the English leader, instead of me bombing away at this little town and destroying it, and then what? All I've got is a chunk of real estate. But if I keep that brain trust, keep what they've invented, that secret sauce, Let them have everything and say, continue doing everything the way you're doing, and we'll just tie it to this, what became the British Empire. And from the Dutch side, they said, as long as we can get everything that we want, maybe this is going to be a better future than what the West India Company was giving us. The Articles of Surrender, so-called, if you read it, is essentially a Bill of Rights. So the story that I tell in Taking Manhattan is the story of the founding of two factions within American colonial history. And those two factions, I think, have always been struggling to fit together. And I think now more than ever, if we can engage those in one conversation, that I think, to me, that would be the mission of the New York Historical going forward, as opposed to two separate conversations, each of which kind of ignores the other. It's important for people to know history, to care about history, because we are stuck. We are stuck as a country right now, and that stuckness comes out of the past. So to untangle that, to get back to where we can potentially, maybe it's naive, but potentially get on the same track, you have to unpack, you have to back up, you have to understand who our parents and grandparents and great-parents thought they were and what journey they thought they were on.